Big hand to Roseanne Barr.
I thank you all so much for coming. I think I won't be up here long. You're going to hear really important and interesting and life-affirming, life-changing things tonight, if you're paying attention at all. And I just wanted to say it's so cool that this church had us and has allowed us to come here, because I don't know, it's just so cool that truth is being spoken in a church. It's like a first. It's like a miracle is what it is. I got to tell you, I feel the Spirit moving me, because I mean, I do. I feel the Spirit. I feel the Spirit of the Most High thing on earth, which is the truth. And this is exactly where it should be spoken, is in places that are big multi-million-dollar monuments to supposed truth, but really aren't, have nothing to do with it. It seems like have more to do with suppressing the truth than bringing the truth. But boy, what a great night this is. And for me, you know, it's a great night for me because this is my Sabbath. Friday night is my Sabbath. I have my own religion. I made it up all myself. And it really is a good thing. And what I did was I just combined everything good out of every religion into one thing, and all the teachings of every religion, because I figured, well, if people have a need to hear something holy or to believe in something holy, well, that's pretty cool that they have that impulse at all. But in order to hear something holy, there's got to exist something holy. That's where we're having a little bit of an issue. But I just think that if we all pull together, we could really come up with some holy truths. And then if we could say them in the churches and even in the streets or anywhere, I just still have hope that that alone would make a lot of changes and a lot of positive changes for all humanity, because there isn't nothing higher than the truth. And truth is the truth. And, you know, in truth, of course, I'm talking about scientific truth. That's what also should be in these churches, but isn't, is kept out. There's just so many paradoxes. There's just so many things. This is what mind control does to us. It seems to start at a church level, too, for most of us. But mind control, man, a lot of people left the church because, you know, they kind of got wise to a lot of the happenings inside the church, which have to do a lot with, you know, horrific child abuse, pedophilia, money laundering, and blah, blah, political action committees, all the horrible things. But, you know, that there is something holy in the world called truth, and that has data to back it up, is pretty fantastic. That it exists at all is fantastic. That you can stand in the heat of it and just feel its warmth and just feel how the more of it you take in, the stronger you get. And somewhere along the way, I kind of got addicted to truth, because I was like, man, you know, once you get the taste of what it feels like to speak it, even in private, after having been denied the right to do so for a long time, you kind of get addicted to it. You kind of like it. You kind of want more of it all the time, and I want more and more of it. I love standing in it. I know that people who tell the truth, like, people hate people who tell them the truth. I know that. I've kind of learned that along the way. People, they really hate your guts if you tell the truth and stuff. And they say they love truth sayers and truth tellers, but they really only like you after you've been dead about 400 years. And mostly if you died in a horrible, torturous way for telling the truth, then they kind of like you for being a truth teller, like, you know, a few hundred years after you're dead. But I don't care. I think about that a lot, and I think about, like, why don't you just stay home? You know, why don't you just shut up for a while and knit or something? You can have a real good life, I say to myself. You can have a real comfortable life. You can have parties, and you could, like, make movies, and you could go back on TV, and you could do, like, fun stuff. But, you know, I'd rather be part of truth. I don't know. I'm mentally ill or something. I don't know. It feels real good. I just trust that it's the greatest high and the greatest thing, and it is God. To me, it is God. It is God, and I will have no gods before it. And I am just so honored and to say, first of all, Dr. Lois Lee, you are like the bravest person. The fact that you exist and that I walk the earth with you is so humbling to me. You are a hero among heroes. You're the bravest woman in the world. I love you. You do good work. You do good work no matter what. You stand in the truth no matter what. God bless you. I want to say to Julia and Christine, God bless you too. God loves lesbians and gays, I tell you that. In my religion, God has some good taste. And Dr. Colin Ross, you're a hero among heroes. Oh my God, you're just such a fantastic person and so brave that you took on everything that's like pushed under in this country, which to me goes back to like, you know, the Nazis who came to America and took over our country and are doing a pretty damn good job of winning. But Dr. Ross, you stood there and you exposed it all, and you continue to do so. And you know, I'm just awed to know you, Dr. Ross, and you're just a great person, and God bless you. And God bless Mark Phillips. Thanks for all that you've done too. You're a brave man, and you know that I know how brave you are. I just want you to know that. I know how brave you are, and I'm glad to know you. And Cathy O'Brien, am I introducing Cathy, aren't I? Oh, who am I bringing up? Dr. Lois Lee, okay. But let me just say, Cathy O'Brien, I love you. You are so fun. You are so fun, and you still have, they didn't get it, you know, they didn't get it in you, and they didn't get it in me. They didn't get the kid part that knows everything anyway, and I love the way you speak from that kid truth, and, you know, just God bless you, and what an honor it is to know you. And let me bring up, like, this woman is just, she just kicks butt. I know we're not supposed to swear because it's church. But she kicks butt. Dr. Lois Lee.
Well, thanks so much for inviting me here, and thanks so much all of you for coming. I'm going to base what I have to say here on the motto of one of the great law enforcement officers of all time, which is Sergeant Joe Friday. And his motto was, just the facts, man. So what I'm going to give you is just the facts. Little quick synopsis of the absolutely documented, objective, real history of CIA military mind control experimentation, most of it done by psychiatrists, psychologists. And this for sure is just the declassified tiny tip of the iceberg, but it's definitely is fact, and it's definitely stranger than fiction. And since I'm the only person who has slides tonight, you got to watch my slide the whole time. These are the two books that I've written on the subject of CIA military mind control. And this is my contact information for anybody who wants to email or has a question and so on. So before I get into the facts, I want to tell you a story that's obviously preposterous and impossible. Just to give you, here's the facts at this end, here's the impossible and the preposterous at this end. And this is clearly a false memory story which couldn't possibly be true. So a woman alleged that she was employed at the University of Minnesota as a research assistant to one of the professors, and that this professor had given her a dose of LSD and made her sit in a specially constructed room that was entirely lined with leaves. There was leaves glued to the wall. And she alleged that this happened under a nationally funded research grant in the 1960s in full public view at the University of Minnesota. And she alleged that the LSD resulted in a bad trip and she had to be treated in the emergency department. So if this woman came to a court of law, many psychiatrists and psychologists would testify that this is obviously impossible, preposterous, not real, no such thing ever happened. We'll take a look at the next slide. This is the Ames Leaf Room, developed by Dr. Ames on contract to the Office of Naval Research. The Ames leaf room was used in experiments at the University of Minnesota conducted by Dr. Amedeo Marazzi on contract to the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. And this is one of his papers, and in the paper, on the first page, it says that it was funded by the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. So these are facts. And this is a picture, actually from a different paper, of another subject in the Ames leaf room. And he's sitting here. He has levers here that he can control with his hand. And in some of the experiments, the subjects were wearing special goggles with lenses called anisoconic lenses, which distorted all the angles. So when they're sitting in the Ames leaf room, one wall's going this way, the floor's going this way, nothing meets up and makes any sense. So they would be in the Ames leaf room wearing anisoconic lenses while on hallucinogenic doses of LSD. And this guy is controlling these knobs to make this bar at the end of the leaf room appear to him to be horizontal. The conclusion from this research was that when you're high on LSD, wearing anisoconic lenses, your perception is distorted. But Amedeo Marazzi was not an amusing gentleman. He was a contractor at the Army Chemical Corps at Edgware Arsenal, and he studied many, many different types of compounds for mind control, to cause derangements of the mind. He was contracted to the military, and the military was conducting this research not to figure out how to treat medical disorders, but how to conduct interrogations, drag information out of people, and erase memories. This is a photograph, and there's the web page at the bottom here. Somebody emailed to me, and I went to the web page where the photograph is posted. And this is a little girl, according to the photograph, this is unverified, who participated in a CIA mind control program called MKUltra. Now, whether or not this photograph is staged or real, this is a picture of the kind of documented experiments that were done under MKUltra and related programs, where people were kept in bed for weeks or months at a time, given extremely high doses of electric shock. One woman I interviewed, whose medical records I have, who successfully sued the Canadian government and was reimbursed for the damages, from May to September 1965, she had 103 electric shock treatments. Each electric shock treatment, the button was pushed 6 times instead of once. So she had the equivalent of 600 shock treatments in a period of months, which permanently erased all memory from age 25 back. When I interviewed her in the 1990s, she was a very pleasant, normal, gifted, engaging, entertaining, lovely woman who still could remember nothing from age 25 back. These experiments were conducted at the university in Montreal, McGill University, which at the time was really the leading university in Canada, on contract to the Canadian government and to the CIA. And the purpose of the experiments, obviously, is to figure out how to wipe out somebody's memories permanently if they know things that you don't want them to know. This is just a quick listing of the main declassified projects, which started in the early 50s. Bluebird and Artichoke were actually signed into existence by the director of the CIA in April of 1950, 3 months before the start of the Korean War. So the idea that we only got into this in a reactive defensive kind of mode based on what the North Korean and Communist Chinese were doing to our pilots is complete lie, complete disinformation, impossible, not true. So there's a whole series of these projects, and these are just their names. The names sometimes have some specific meaning and sometimes apparently don't. MK Naomi was named after the secretary of one of the guys in the CIA. And the prefix MK apparently designates the division of the CIA that ran these experiments. So there's many of them, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. But they all stop in terms of declassified documents in the early 1970s. All the programs running from then till now are still classified. Was this just some mad scientist in a basement somewhere? This is just a little quick sampling of the institutions that were funded under Bluebird, Artichoke, MKUltra, and other related programs, almost all of them at the top secret clearance level. So these are not obscure institutions. These are the top medical schools and universities in the country. This is a network of doctors who are presidents of the American Psychiatric Association, editors of leading journals, editors of leading books. It's the grandfathers of psychiatry. It's pervasive, it's institutionalized, it's structured, and it involves all the leaders of American psychiatry for the entire second half of the 20th century. Eli Lilly Company is the manufacturers of Prozac. At the end of the talk, there'll be a multiple choice exam that I'll be giving. One of the questions.
Okay, so after the program, you can definitely pick up. Our next speaker is a gentleman who's a native of Nashville, Tennessee. For nearly 30 years, he was a highly successful marketing and advertising executive for 2 airlines and a medical equipment manufacturing company. While he lacks the published academic credentials as a scholar, professional writer, or mental health physician, he is recognized internationally, that's around the world, by mental health and law enforcement professionals as a credible authority on the secret science concerning external control of the mind. Throughout his career, he has held a DoD, that's Department of Defense, for those who don't know, issued top secret security clearance as he was exposed to various classified behavioral modification projects. Mark Phillips was required to sign an oath of secrecy. To this day, he's restricted by sedition laws from revealing certain specific, still classified details that directly relates to his employment. What he's going to tell you today is unclassified, correct? Okay. Welcome, Mark Phillips, everybody. Give him a big round of applause.
Thank you very, very much, ladies and gentlemen, and a special thanks to Julia Jecker and KPFK and each and every one of you that has communicated with someone else to get someone else out here tonight. I have special thanks very deep in my heart to Roseanne Barr and Dr. Colin Ross, who I have admired since the early 90s when we met in his office. His work has been unique among all the psychiatrists and psychologists that I've had the good fortune of meeting around the world. Dr. Ross's work stands out as unique. He has taken on something that would, in essence, destroy the career of most psychiatrists. However, he knew that this information had to come forth, and it had to come forth from someone with academic credentials. I lacked those academic credentials. My experience was firsthand, and what Dr. Ross outlined for you all tonight in his presentation were some of the doctors, and some of them I know and knew very well. I was not aware of some of the things that Dr. Ross was outlining that they were doing, and while others later on I was aware. Briefly, in 1966, when the Vietnam War was heating up, I was not that good of a student, and I knew that I was going to be drafted. And I really didn't want to become cannon fodder. However, I was very fortunate, and cutting straight to it, I applied for a job as an engineer, and I'm not a math guy. I applied for a job as an engineer working for the Ampex Corporation out of Redwood City, California. And ironically enough, out of hundreds of candidates, because that job was something of an unusual job, it would get you a deferment because you would be serving your country without having to go over and have your head blown off. I was accepted. And for the first 6 months of my job, I didn't have a job. I went through batteries of psychological tests 3 times a week by as many as 5 different doctors. Some were psychiatrists, some were psychologists, and I'm sure that the names that I had, not one of them was real. I began to see the pattern in the questions that they were asking. And then one of them confided in me. He said, you know, of course, since 1952, Mark, the United States government, though computers were very primitive, if even existent at that time, they nevertheless kept track of all of the children enrolled in public schools that had either special needs or they had special talents. And my special talent was I couldn't talk. And it was not from lack of vocal cords. It was the fact that I stuttered so horribly that I just gave up. This was something that the government became very interested in because I lived in my head until I was about 16. And I was fortunate to get some speech therapy and learn how to talk. So the government recruited me. And what I saw over the next couple of decades and a half was not really anything that would turn the stomach of any person in this room. As a matter of fact, you would have been proud, most likely, to have had the opportunity to have been in the position that I was in. I worked at some of those places. Tulane. And when he mentioned Emory, I was on the Emory campus. I was on the part of where the Yerkes Primate Center was. I wasn't in the other part that Dr. Ross was referring to. I never saw that part. I went over to the CDC. Can you imagine wanting to go to the CDC because they had really good lunches? They really did. I was working at the Yerkes Primate Center. I was working in state and federal penitentiaries. My job really in the very beginning was nothing more than a bag man. Ampex was providing the equipment and the videotape, and they were videotaping experiments, behavioral modification experiments. They were taking incorrigible prisoners, people with brain damage, and using a psychological and electrochemical approach, no high voltage to the brain, very low voltage, if at all. And there were some chemicals used, and it altered the people's brain chemistry to where they became normalized. And these people, for the most part, had been institutionalized, if not most of their life, all of their life. It was an incredible thing, and the doctors that I worked with, even some of them had come over on Project Paperclip, they believed, as I did, that by the year 2000, our penitentiaries and our mental institutions, for the most part, would be emptied out. What we saw and what we were involved with had nothing to do with torture. Now, torture has become mainstream. And the most horrifying, frustrating thing that I can imagine is why there's even a discussion about it being being a tool to extract information. You don't extract intelligence using torture. I mean, this has been known since the Inquisition. I mean, this has been around forever. You program information in using torture. Those people that are on your TV sets advocating torture, Cathy named in her testimony that we provided both houses of Congress, intelligence oversight committees. And by the way, I do have some sympathy for them. Very recently, the head of the Intelligence Oversight Committee, I just can't say her name, I just can't do it. Nancy Pelosi. I did it. Nancy Pelosi stood up or sat down before the cameras, and for the first time I saw a politician be 100% honest. And I almost fainted. She said that the Intelligence Oversight Committee was a joke. It was a joke because of the 1947 National Security Act, the same National Security Act that was imposed upon our case in open court. She said, she went on to say to her interviewer, she said, it's a joke because we're supposed to be, the Oversight Committee, we all carry the proper clearance to look at what could be something that's terribly wrong or has gone wrong, to review as oversight those projects that the intelligence community and the Department of Defense have been working on or have been involved with. She said, all we see is black ink. She said, we can't do our job, and they haven't been able to do their job forever. She said, the Intelligence Oversight Committee is strictly a front. We know this to be a fact because by the time our testimony, our voluminous testimony had reached Congress, I saw what it looked like. I saw what a particular member on one of the committees, what he looked at. And it didn't resemble anything that we sent them. It was all blacked out. I've jumped ahead, and I'll give you a little history for those of you who don't know. In 1987, I had a joint venture company I was president of with the People's Republic of China, manufacturing capacitor banks for their mining industry. They knew that I had been involved in the intelligence community for most all of my life. They weren't concerned about that in the least. They did lock me up in my hotel room when I got there and took my passport away, but I fully expected that. And it was fun sneaking out of the room while they had guards. Nevertheless, it was, I had an excellent relationship with them, and we had a great company. We had the ribbon cutting ceremonies in the Shenzhen province, which is an industrial zone down in southern, I guess you'd call it southeastern China. And a Chinese intelligence officer, a well-dressed gentleman, and, oh, by the way, the military controls everything made out of metal in China. So since our capacitors, which are normally just big batteries, they're oil-filled tanks with paper wound up real tight, that was considered military. And I like that. I like working with the Chinese military. Not only were they shrewd business people, they were also very honest. And if they gave their word on something, and believe you me, they will trick you any way they can, make you give your word on something that you really don't want to do. Though I was approached by this intelligence officer, and he had a small attaché case, and he opens it up, and he began showing me a file on myself. And I knew right then that my business with Chinese was finished, because I was going to go back and contact someone I know with the Department of State and tell them there had been a national security breach, because the files that on me that were classified, I was looking at either the best photocopies or I was looking at some original files, because you could tell they were weathered, you could tell that they had the original stamps, and everybody that looked at them had signed off on them. And I was absolutely convinced that someone had taken my files and just casually shown them to me. This was a rude awakening, because at this point, the jubilation in my heart about our business and the ribbon cutting ceremony had suddenly gone downhill until it got worse. This intelligence officer explained to me that I had a partner back in the United States by the name of Alex Houston, who was a country music entertainer, by the way. Not an entertainer, please. We have a great entertainer in the house. To call Alex Houston an entertainer is not a good thing. But he was a ventriloquist. He was a stage hypnotist. And he was one, I'm a linguist, and I listen to people's subconscious language. And I'm also a graphologist, and I look at their handwriting. He was not only a crook, he was a liar, and he was a thief. And I thought that his sexuality was completely turned around to where he was what I would call trisexual. Anything. But nevertheless, I didn't have to have much association with him. And then when the Chinese told me that I had to get rid of him, they even provided me the funding to pay him off. But I found out that he had a young woman and her little girl in his charge, and those were the words. And I said, what is he doing with them? He said, child and adult prostitution, money laundering, and this child and this mother are being used as drug mules. And the last line was, and it goes all the way to the White House. He didn't say a word about CIA. He didn't mention one single thing. He said, except it goes all the way to the White House. When I got back, I reported the incident to the Department of State of someone that I know, and someone I didn't know called me back the next day and said I was never to mention it again. Forget about it. It didn't happen. That was shocking, because then I realized how naive I'd been. And then when I met Cathy briefly at the airport, and I saw that 1,000-mile stare, no color in her eyes, just big black pupils and a perpetual smile. And I thought, wow, that's very sad. So I began to make some inquiries to see what I could do about getting her out, and her daughter, who was only about 7 or 8 years old at the time. And I found out that there was nobody interested in helping. But because I'd made some inquiries, particularly one when I wanted to know how to trigger her out so that she would come to me, because no one escapes mind control. Make this very clear. That's called abuse. That's called abuse. There's a thing called Stockholm Syndrome, where the person who's being abused becomes sympathetic with their abuser. They become totally compliant. If you told them 1,000 times a day they were under mind control, you would only serve to agitate them. Never can you convince someone that they're under mind control if they are under mind control. It's impossible. I had to have help. And the only people that I knew to go for help to were the very ones that were capable of doing something like this. And I shuddered to think that some of the people I had trusted so much could have done it. So I went another channel, and I was very fortunate to have found the people that I needed to talk to get some help. And it took 9 months, and as Dr. Ross could tell you, Dr. Ross could tell you, doctors don't have 16, 18-hour-a-day sessions, and they don't have 9 solid months to devote to one patient. Well, that's what I did, because I had nothing left to lose. I had lost $2.2 million out of my bank accounts. My back was against the wall. Fortunately, they threatened to kill me many times. And when they threaten to kill you, that means they're not going to do it. So I really wasn't concerned about that. All I wanted to do in the beginning, I'm not as noble as Roseanne says. I really didn't like Cathy. And all I wanted to do was get back to my work. I just wanted to get her out of that, and her daughter, and get them into help. And I couldn't find any help because there weren't any Colin Rosses in this country at that time. Dr. Ross was studying in Winnipeg, I believe, exotic dancers and prostitutes, and a type of disorder that they had, many of them, that was consistent, if I remember our conversations. So I really didn't have any choice except to stick it out. And I'm so glad I did. Because even though I felt duped, and even though I was mad as hell, and I can say hell in a church, I was mad as hell that I felt like that I had been duped. And all those, but I felt comfortable though, because all those brilliant scientists that I worked with, they'd all been duped too. Because in the intelligence business, it's very compartmentalized unless you get into the people like Jolly West. And by the way, Jolly West was the first person to call me on my unlisted phone in Alaska. Margaret Singer was the second person to call me. And Margaret Singer said if I didn't come down to L.A., she would send somebody up to see me. I said, send them on. And she did. And he said, if I didn't shut up, I was going to die. I said, nobody gets off this planet alive anyway, unless you're an astronaut. I was very fortunate because when Cathy came together, she came together and became who she is today. And, you know, we don't have a chance to have many heroes in life. But I have a hero, and she's my hero. And I'm here tonight. I'm very, very, very grateful to have the opportunity to introduce the love of my life and the hero of my life because of how many people she's helped. And we want to perpetuate this through Access Denied for Reasons of National Security, which was a book that Cathy wrote about how she was deprogrammed, how she recovered. And it helps people of all levels. And I'm not talking about the kind of abuse that Cathy had necessarily. I'm talking about all levels. From all of us that were traumatized by 9/11, by all of us who have been traumatized by just living on this planet. She's helped tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people through that one work. I would like to catch up. I'd like to see us catch up with some other people that have come along down through history. Not because we want a name in history. Frankly, I would just assume no one knew my name. And I liked it that way. I lived that way. Nobody knew who I was. Now, it seems a few people do. And what's important is now they identify me with something good instead of something bad. And that's a good thing. I'd like to take this opportunity right now to introduce Cathy O'Brien. Come on.
Love is the greatest healer. I'm so fortunate to know love and to have survived my experiences, to be here tonight to speak out on the subject of mind control. Thank you, all of you, each and every one of you, for coming out here to arm yourself with this pertinent information. Love is the greatest motive for me to speak out on this subject because it is my love for humanity that compels me to bring this truth to light. I'm deeply concerned for our survival if we don't learn this information. The experience that I had could have left me very bitter and vengeful and hateful, but it is none of those negatives that compel me to speak out at all, because I find that those kind of negatives actually hinder my ability to even think clearly. If I'm outraged, I'm not even capable of thinking so well. Besides, negativity tends to feed the energy of the criminals that are in control of our government right now, manipulating the minds of all of us. Now that I'm free to speak out, and now that I know love, it feels so good to realize that there are good people in this world, that there is good and bad running through everything. Here we are speaking in a church, and yet a church was so much a part of my abuse. So again, there's good and bad in everything. There's good and bad in government. There's good and bad even in the CIA. Mark Phillips is some powerful evidence to me that there are people in intelligence who have integrity and soul and compassion. And that was a real eye-opener for me, because my whole world was covered in abuse. My whole world was one where I couldn't see beyond my experiences of the moment. I couldn't even think to hope anymore. I lost that ability at about age 6. How it happened was that I was born into a multi-generational incest-based family like so many other people are. There's certainly nothing rare about it. Child abuse is so pervasive on our planet. All we need to do is open our eyes and look around us to see how widespread that it is. The sexual abuse that I experienced left my sexuality heightened, which is very common in a situation like that. And I'm sure that Dr. Lois Lee has seen so many of these children that, like myself, end up on the streets as prostitutes with their sexuality being exploited even further because of abuse that they'd already endured in childhood. It's absolutely atrocious, the extent of the abuse that's going on for systematic, deliberate reasons, and for reasons that have just become a so-called norm, a natural part of our society, because after 3 generations of an attitude of sexual abuse, it becomes autogenic within a family unit. That's why I said that I'm from a multi-generational incest-based family. My mother was sexually abused, my father was sexually abused, and the sexual abuse just goes all up the family tree. I don't see that as their excuse for abusing me sexually whatsoever. I ended up with like a 100th monkey syndrome, as something where I didn't have that natural propensity to continue that abuse or to even accept it and to think that it's the way things should be. As a matter of fact, it was so traumatic to me that I developed dissociative identity disorder, formerly termed multiple personality disorder. It's not that I could think to judge my father when he abused me. It wasn't like that at all. I mean, I was so very young. It happened as far back as I can remember, and he often bragged that he substituted his penis for my mother's nipple. So it was very early on. I also know that my father was like that with my brothers and sisters that came along in later years. So it was way before I could morally judge such a thing or before I had any kind of mental concept of how life should be. Instead, my brain automatically kicked in. When the abuse occurred, it began to compartmentalize the trauma of that event so that the rest of my mind could function normally. My father's sexual abuse of me was horrific because it suffocated me and it caused a lot of pain as a very, very young infant. At the same time, it put my sexuality into a survival mode that was the equivalent of breathing or eating or drinking. It was just became a very strong base instinct. The Hitler-Himmler research had already determined that this was what happens in the human brain when anytime abuse occurs. And when abuse occurs, where the brain begins to section off the abuse so the rest of the mind can function normally, there becomes less and less conscious mind to be able to think through exactly what is happening. They were very much interested in this because if the traumas are repeated enough and there's enough compartmentalization created in the brain, then the subconscious mind is left wide open to being manipulated and easily led. That was what they wanted for mass mind control in a society. It's what they wanted for that kind of Manchurian candidate attitude and for being able to manipulate, ultimately, the politics of the planet as well as the population as a whole. These experiments that Dr. Ross referred to were so heavily going on when I was born in 1957 that by the early 60s, mind control was in full swing. The CIA was taking information from what the Catholics had long since learned about the effects of trauma on the human mind when they did the Spanish Inquisition and the Crusades, and they found out how people responded to that kind of trauma, that kind of torture. And it was so strong on the population, as a matter of fact, that it ended up where the few free thinkers that were left went underground, and secret societies began forming and spinning off that. I'm not saying secret societies are right or that they're good, but they came from horrible, torturous abuse that was going on, that was trying to control people and steer them into one belief rather than leaving them to their own normal development. Project Paperclip had already happened, and the Nazi and fascist scientists from Hitler's Nazi Germany were brought into the United States, and the information was being combined with this information from the Catholics that the CIA was combining into a very powerful form of mind control. The MK-Ultra mind control projects were very strong, but they weren't just experimental at the time that I was in. They were already absolute. They knew exactly what they were doing. And they even had it established where they had a certain faction of the government set up to target children like my dissociative identity disorder, where the memory of the abuse was compartmentalized into those different compartments. Along with that compartmentalization comes a 44 times visual acuity, because it's like you get these eyes in the back of your head to see if the abuse is coming. And when people have been horribly traumatized, you'll notice that their eyes are wide open, and very often you see the whites around their eyes. Their blink responses aren't aren't even proper. But that's because the body is going into this mode of, trying to stop the problem before it happens again, or is trying to stop the traumas and the horrors before they occur again. Additionally, it's like we use 10% of our brain. I've heard figures 8 to 10% of our brains is about what we use. Well, when you have that kind of abuse, it like blasts you into other parts of your brain. And so you end up in using other parts that most people never get to because they don't even know that it exists yet. Because the information that's so important to know about our own brains, that we all have a right to know, have been suppressed for so-called reasons of national security, so that the information can be used to control us instead of to let us know what our brains are capable of. Our brains are capable of far more than we ever dreamed, and I feel really fortunate to have survived my ordeal to know what our brains can do and to be able to exercise mine and use mine for freely in the ways that everyone should know we can do, such as the 44 times visual acuity. I recently used that when I was diagnosed with cataracts, and I was going to have cataract surgery and all, and I thought, if I can have 44 times visual acuity, why can't I fix this part of my eyes? When I went in for the pre-examination set up for the surgery, my eyes were 100% cured, and they have stayed that way. Those are little things that we can do because of what we're capable of, that instead we're being just manipulated by, and that kind of information is being kept from us, because 44 times visual acuity is a very important factor for the government to be able to pluck children like myself and put them into military intelligence or military special forces, because they can shoot and not miss a target. Their vision is so precise. Additionally, when a child is abused and they begin developing these compartments in the brain, as more and more compartments develop on the subconscious level, and the conscious mind is being pushed out of the way, where there's no capacity for question, reason, conscious awareness, and conscious thought. Because when you're operating in these different compartments, for example, the one that developed because of my father's sexual abuse. When my father would come in and to sexually abuse me, the same part of my brain that was familiar with that would open up, so that he would do it again and again as needed, and yet it would still remain compartmentalized in this section. Our brains are phenomenal. So that the rest of my mind could function normally. Well, that part of my brain would open up for my father's sexual abuse. Then my father began prostituting me. My mother's father had a Blue Masonic Lodge. He ran a Blue Masonic Lodge up in Michigan, and it was where the politicians were just real, local politicians were just real active. And my father began prostituting me out to different ones who were aware of the child abuse, because of the knowledge coming through on CIA mind control and being so much a part of a criminal faction of our government that's also referred to as the shadow government, that was slowly gaining control and finally gained control with the Kennedy assassination. They'd already got a pretty good control, but they really took a major control over the population, because, like I was telling you, when trauma occurs, then the brain has a way of kicking in to deal with trauma. And most people who are old enough to know exactly where they were and what they were doing at the time that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. It traumatized the nation. It traumatized the nation to see it on TV over and over and over again. That trauma left people suggestible, left that subconscious open to where they were highly suggestible and easily led. And that was the beginning. Consider what I'm saying with the effects of what happened 9/11 or 9/11 as it's referred. I refer to it as 911 because that's the emergency number. And they like to do those kind of number games anyway. It was also flight 11 at 9. So they were playing that with the numbers, but nevertheless, on 9/11, the whole nation was traumatized. And in that trauma, people became suggestible. And how many people ran out and bought a flag, you know, because that was what we were told to do. And the compliance of the people at that time was so strong, and it gave the shadow government a firm control over all of us that is just finally now shaking. It's finally starting to stop because people are waking up, and they're waking up en masse. And it's happening all over this country. Mark and I travel outside this country, and we're thrilled to see how much more wide awake and aware the rest of the world is at this point, where they have a compassion for people in the United States, knowing that we are not our government. We are not that shadow government that's taken over, that the people here are rising up, they're gaining voice, and they're standing strong by issues of 9/11 and taking action in their own communities. Mark and I have been speaking out on mind control for over 20 years now. That's a long time to be speaking out on the subject. We've seen a vast difference between when we first started speaking and now. People are waking up, and it's awareness that is that we've got to have. We've got to keep this awareness going, because knowledge is our only defense against mind control. The compartmentalization of memory that I was talking about, where when my father began prostituting me to these political people as well, developed more compartments in my brain. It was like, oh, well, where do I turn? You know, I can't even turn to our local law enforcement. I can't turn to politicians. And, you know, I really felt that there was nowhere to go, and my brain automatically began compartmentalizing. Further, when my father began doing child pornography of me and sold it through the local Michigan Mafia child pornography ring, that criminal faction of the government, that shadow government that was monitoring such things as those child pornography rings, we didn't have internet back then, the child pornography rings, to target children like myself for MK Ultra mind control. And of course, I'd mentioned that Blue Masonic Lodge, and one of the members there was a local politician named Gerald Ford. Of course, this is the same Gerald Ford that went into the office of president, and was very much a part of how I ended up being used on a White House Pentagon level during the Reagan-Bush administration. But he was interested this criminal faction was interested in children like myself, because when you have so many of those compartments, there's no continuity of thought anymore. If you operate in this compartment and have no memory of it, operate in this compartment and have no memory of it, there's no way to have any continuity of thought bridging, and there's no ability to have any continuity of time. You don't have a concept of time at all. I didn't know. I began to lose my whole perspective on time, how long anything was. This is something that they were also interested in. They know it's a phenomena of the brain, because when a person doesn't know how long they've been doing something, the physical endurance is tremendous. You don't get tired if you don't know you're supposed to be tired. So it creates a physical endurance that's really good for military special forces, military intelligence, or the kind of political prostitution that I was eventually used in the course of the kind of missions that I was forced to carry out in later years. So this local politician, who was just one more pedophile to me, came to the house and told my father that he could receive immunity from prosecution if he would agree to sell me into the CIA's mind control project. My father agreed to it, was actually pretty thrilled about it, thinking, wow, you know, the government condones child abuse, this is wonderful. He excitedly agreed to it, had 5 more children afterwards just to raise in the project. So there were 7 of us children in the family and all. But as soon as my father agreed, he was flown to Boston, Massachusetts for a course on how to manipulate the subconscious mind. Since it was my subconscious mind that was open, he was taught how to do it in speaking in literals, where a person would take things very literally. He also was instructed that he would have to take me to certain places at certain times so that I would be in the right place for whatever the CIA's mind control operations were conditioning me for, and eventually the ones that I would be working in. Boston, Massachusetts is a real key epicenter place to mention because, as I'm sure all of you have heard, that's where the Catholic child abuse scandal was right there out of Boston, Massachusetts. Look at the vast numbers that you have heard about that have been sexually abused within a Catholic church. It wasn't homosexuality. They made a really huge effort to make it look like homosexuality when in fact it's pedophilia. They just love to put those kind of emotional diversions out there to try to divide the people instead of get right to the truth, because truth unites us. It's all those lies and false attitudes that end up dividing us and creating problems. So I was raised in the Catholic Church. I had been all along. Our church in Muskegon, Michigan was actively involved with the CIA on mind control. I certainly wasn't the only one. As a matter of fact, I thought it was the way life was because everybody I knew, there was some horrible abuse going on. It's like it was a way of life in Muskegon, Michigan. It has since been termed the pedophile capital of the United States. That came out in the Muskegon Chronicle, and it's a widely known fact. Muskegon, Michigan is a horrible place to have come from, but it really gave me the idea that that's the way the whole world was, when in fact, obviously, it's not. But neither are all Catholics bad. You know, I've certainly learned since then that there are Catholics who are very determined to bring that criminal activity out of the church and bring it back to whatever. And it's supposed to be, when you consider the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition, man, it's quite a history of it they've got to undo there. But nevertheless, there are some people that are aware and are making a difference. But for me, it only added more compartments to my brain because then I was subjected to occult ritual. Occultism is a horrible blood trauma that certainly created more compartments in my mind. The Catholic aspect was just one more horrible thing to know. Well, you know, you can't even turn to a church for help. And it's been all these years before finally even the child abuse began to shake the very foundations of the church. And yet they were still, you know, diverting things. I mean, whoever heard my name with that Catholic child abuse scandal? I mean, I certainly wasn't able to be part of any lawsuits, even though the ones that were prosecuting it referred to our book, Access Denied, for reasons of national security because of the pertinent information in there on not only why that kind of child abuse was going on, but how to heal from it, because there's a lot of people that need help, and to be able to heal from varying levels of child abuse, of sexual abuse, varying levels of the suggestibility and ultimately mind control that is resultant from those traumas. My father was also told to take me to the governor's mansion in Michigan, which was located in Mackinac, island, and the governor at the time was George Romney. Of course, Mitt Romney is his son, and that's very important to know. We need to pay attention to our politics because it's not about naming a certain name so that you know who these people are, because it's just going to replace them with somebody else. And now we've got generations. George Romney was the one who was part of my victimization. He's the one who was actively involved in merging Catholic information with the CIA information on mind control in order to bring it into a more powerful form of mind control, which combined with technology, which we have today, combined with technology, was the most powerful form of mind control that was being brought into the Mormon Church. And the Mormon Church was something I was exposed to later on, and it is a very powerful form of mind control. That one needs to clean up their mess next. But pay attention to these so-called politicians we're getting paraded in front of us as something new and something different, because in fact, that's just not the way it is. I met my owner, who would become my owner in the CIA's mind control project, U.S. Senator Robert C. Byrd. Senator Byrd has been in office as long as I've been alive. I can't believe he's still in office today. He's been head of Senate Appropriations. As head of Senate Appropriations, he decides where money is going to be spent and how. As my owner, Senator Byrd directed my activities during the Reagan-Bush administration when I worked on a White House Pentagon level. Senator Byrd is funding the mind control mechanism in our school systems. He has funded the so-called, he was the one who introduced the so-called Clean Air and Water Act, which in fact I watched all those years where he just lined his pockets with buy-offs so people could pollute and destroy the environment and destroy our planet even more. We need to pay closer attention to what these politicians are doing, especially when they've been in there so many years that they know how to play the game. This is the shadow government that's been manipulating us all. Going back on Gerald Ford, as Gerald Ford went, as his political career escalated into the office of the presidency, notice who was in his cabinet. I certainly did. I was exposed to him from the mid-'70s throughout my whole victimization. He had Dick Cheney as his Secretary of State, Donald Rumsfeld as his Secretary of Defense, George Bush Sr. as head of the CIA. I knew Dick Cheney from the mid-'70s when I was first taken out to Wyoming to where his hunting ranch is, where he embarked on his most favorite game called the most dangerous game of human hunting, where a person is hunted. I had no clue whether or not I was going to live. How would I know that? And I was subjected to horrible, brutal tortures by Dick Cheney repeatedly throughout my victimization. And now he's acting like, oh, we just started torture after 9/11. Who believes that? Come on, this has been going on forever. That was his excuse to just traumatize a nation and allow for further control over the people. There's a whole lot more torture that's going on than waterboarding. And there's a whole lot more even to waterboarding than what we see on TV. My daughter Kelly has even drawn pictures, graphic detail of waterboarding. Once Mark rescued Kelly and I out of the horrible experiences that we endured. She was taken into the custody of the state of Tennessee. where she was abused further by the so-called mental health system, while national security was put all over her case, and her records are still sealed for so-called reasons of national security. Were they not sealed, you would see her graphic pictures of waterboarding. I wonder if those are the kind of records Dick Cheney wants out there, to see what my daughter endured. My daughter is still suffering the effects of the tortures that she endured. She's waiting on good people like yourselves to wake up and make a positive difference. In the meantime, she and I made every difference that we possibly could in the state of Tennessee. We plowed through them all, letting them know what mind control was. And we had over 1 million letters pouring in to the governor of the state of Tennessee from people all over the world saying, what does national security have to do with a documented rape and molestation of a child? That was a wonderful thing to do. It made a big difference. It made a big difference in the state of Tennessee. It made a big difference within the system. It raised awareness, and it started making that difference. We sure didn't get it from the top on down, because they're still covering it up. They're still covering up the tortures. They're still covering up mind control, and it's got to stop. The truth needs to come out, and it needs to be brought to light for Kelly's sake and for everyone's sake. We all need to know the magnitude of what's really going on in our world. Because Dick Cheney, George Bush Sr., not George Bush Jr., he was absolutely under mind control in the same projects I was, and he was even in the most dangerous going. That's why he comes off so dense. He's really not the one. We need to go behind the scene, because the CIA has been running it behind the scene, or the shadow government has been running behind the scenes for too many decades now. And now that awareness is rising, and people are waking up to the point where they even have to say torture on TV, where it's finally coming out, there is that hope that maybe people will begin to research further and look into what's really happening, because that torture issue is like a little hole in the dike of what's really behind all of it, and that truth needs to start pouring forth. We need to get it out. I'm so fortunate to have survived it. I have so many stories that I could share with you about the different operations that I was used in, the horrible tortures that I saw that go far beyond waterboarding. Those are in graphic detail in our book, Transformation of America. Trans was written when national security was slapped on our case, and it was written so that that information would be out there. It's comprehensive detail, but it's very graphic detail. And for someone who's been victimized, they don't need to know that. They need to know their own truth before they know someone else's. They need to find that truth. And Access Denied was written for them. It was written for the population that's been traumatized by 9/11. It's for a population that's been traumatized by watching these criminals in control of our government making us look like something we're not to the rest of the world. It's these people who've been traumatized by everyday life, by what's happening in their own lives with the economy. It's for people who are horrified by the abuse that they're seeing going on around them. It's for every one of us, because this is a rough planet. And it will teach you what I learned. It will teach you the truth that I found. Once I healed from my mind control victimization, and once I remembered all the details of all those government operations that I was tortured to forget. Now, they weren't extracting information. I said tortured to forget. Dick Cheney knows, and I know he knows it because he's done it to me. Dick Cheney knows that torture is to make people forget and to program them with anything that's put into their subconscious mind at that time. And those were the kind of operations that I was forced to do. You certainly can't extract information that way. There's a whole lot of other technologies out there. There's a whole lot of other methods out there that do work that are very simple. They don't need to torture. There's no excuse for torture other than to traumatize people, traumatize a nation, and to control a mind. It's got to stop. Dick Cheney has got to be stopped. It's up to all of us to be able to make that difference. Bringing Dick Cheney down is not going to stop the shadow government. Bringing Dick Cheney down is not going to stop torture. It's not going to stop the shadow government. It's not going to make the changes that we need in this world. It's not enough. It's already too big. They've been at this too long. Instead, it's up to each and every one of us to make that change within. When I woke up from mind control and I realized that there's good people in this world, I had hope again. When I woke up from mind control, I woke up to realize that there was a form of mind control that blanketed society where people were really dumbed down. It was like I came running out of hell saying, there's mind control, you know, and help my daughter, help me. And yet, nobody knew what it was. It was like I was screaming about a hell and nobody could even see it. It's like, how can this be? And I realized that people had been dumbed down and they'd been conditioned. And that what I had seen that could be done technologically was actually being implemented. What I knew when I worked under Bill Bennett, Ronald Reagan's education secretary during the 80s, that they were bringing the mind control into the school system in order to increase the children's learning capacity while decreasing their ability to critically analyze. That's what's been eroding at our society for so long now. And I woke up to that and went, wow, I got to share this information. This is important that people understand exactly how our brains really work. They know how our brains work, and they're manipulating us by that knowledge. Knowledge is our only defense against mind control. We need to take that knowledge. I could talk for hours, and there's still more for you to research. And I encourage each and every one of you to please do it. I encourage each and every one of you to share the information with those that you love and people that you meet. And start sharing information in Access Denied. Access Denied is helping people heal from all levels of mind control from all over the world. It was written out of demand and a need from people who were reaching out for help because they knew that Mark and I understood. And so we finally wrote sufficient enough that anyone can take it and transpose that information to their own need and heal from any level of abuse or control. People in military special forces are using it. People all over the world are using that information, and they're healing. And with that healing is coming more and more awareness. And as that awareness is rising, the word is spreading. And people are beginning to have grassroots activism. There's people standing strong in this room who have stood by what really happened on 9/11. And thank you for doing it. Keep doing that. We all have to stand strong by what we know. Keep those grassroots growing. Everyone, please take the information and spread the word, because knowledge is our only defense against mind control, and this is the truth that makes us free. Thank you.
Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen, and thanks to Roseanne Barr. We deeply appreciate each and every one of you coming out tonight, and we hope that you'll take this information with you and share it with someone you love.